There are many ways that Ukraine has managed to turn the tide on Russia. Its hordes of drones have obliterated Russia's armor to the point where it's resorted to using smaller units in its assaults. In Russia itself, operatives from Ukraine's intelligence service are working covertly to sabotage facilities and even kill Russian soldiers. But Ukraine hasn't pulled off anything quite like this before. Russia's own security cameras have been turned against it as Ukraine's insane hack turns Russia's eyes into deadly targeting systems. On September 9th, Euromaidan Press released another frontline report in which it revealed that Ukraine had discovered a large concentration of Russian troops in the Donetsk region. Specifically, those troops were amassing around Dobropilia, which has been a target for Russia throughout the summer because capturing that territory potentially offers a pathway to the vital fortress city of Pokrovsk. In the past, such detection efforts would have been the work of reconnaissance groups. More recently, Ukraine's many reconnaissance drones have been taking flight to watch what Russia is doing. However, this time, Ukraine took a different tactic. Rather than relying on drones or risking its soldiers in the field, Ukraine called on its growing cyber army. The IT Army of Ukraine, as it's become known, is a decentralized collective of hackers who do whatever they can to aid their country in its struggle against Russian forces. Often this aid comes in the form of disrupting Russia's financial or government systems. But in September, the IT Army was given a different task: hack Russia's security cameras. These weren't any old security cameras either. They were cameras that Russia had set up specifically to keep eyes on the bases it's been building on the territory that it has snatched from Ukraine in Donetsk. Thanks to these hackers, Ukraine was able to use Russia's own eyes to observe what was happening at these bases. What did Ukraine see? The amassing of forces that appeared to be preparing for a renewed assault on Dobropilia. Russia had set up entire convoys that were supposed to deliver troops and equipment to that territory, likely for what Putin believed would be a last push that would allow his forces to take the town. Instead, Ukraine cut Russia off at the pass. Thanks to what it learned from the hacked security cameras, Ukraine knew where Russia's troops were and where they were going. With that information, Ukraine was able to unleash a massive barrage of drones and missiles, all aimed at bases that Russia believed were safe, to stifle any attempt Russia's forces could make on Dobropilia before it could even start. Euromaidan Press provides more details about what Ukraine saw and how it responded. Thanks to the IT Army, Ukraine discovered that Russia has amassed several units and brigades to create a large assault force, the likes of which is becoming increasingly rare as the Ukraine war draws closer to reaching the end of its fourth year. Among the Russian forces were units from Russia's 155th and 40th Naval Brigades. They were joined by airborne units from Russia's 11th Brigade, Euromaidan Press says, along with some members of the 76th Division. The names of these units and brigades may not mean much to you until you realize where Russia pulled them from. At various points, this force assembled near Dobropilia has been involved in Russia's operations in the Bakhmut, Kursk, and Kherson regions, all of which are places where major battles have taken place. Putin relies on these troops, particularly the regularly reconstituted 155th Brigade, to carry out the most high-risk breakthroughs of the war. The soldiers Ukraine spotted using Russia's security cameras were battle-hardened. However, several had already been shattered by Ukraine before, and it appears that was Putin's plan with Russia's latest assault. This amassed force wasn't necessarily meant to complete the takeover of Dobropilia. As Russian offensive efforts in these sectors are stalling, Euromaidan Press says of the regions where these brigades and units were previously operating, their success is being sacrificed and their forces redirected to the Pokrovsk front, trying to salvage a losing battle now unfolding at the Dobropilia salient. In other words, Putin weakened his army elsewhere to create a collective of cannon fodder he hoped would batter down Ukraine's Dobropilia defenses. Of course, any battering that would take place required those forces to actually make it to Dobropilia. The failure to do so ended up being Russia's undoing. Ukraine's examination of footage captured from the hacked security cameras revealed something that Russia absolutely didn't want Ukraine to learn. Yes, forces had been pulled from several other locations for an assault on Dobropilia. However, those forces were nowhere near ready to launch an attack. A lack of proper armor support and artillery had already been a hallmark of Russia's faltering attempts to take Dobropilia, and the latest force the country assembled was no different. Yes, a convoy was being created, but the new force had nowhere near enough armor or artillery to launch a proper attack. Again, Putin isn't trying to protect his troops. He just wanted them to be cannon fodder on which Ukraine's Dobropilia defenders would waste their ammunition. The state this force was in as Russia prepared to strike should come as no surprise to anybody who has been following Ukraine's progress against Russia's mechanized units during the war. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost 11,172 tanks, 23,622 armored vehicles and 32,606 artillery systems to Ukraine's missiles, rockets, and especially its drones as of September 10th. These are massive numbers across the board, and they've created a shortfall in armor and heavy attacking power from which Russia is struggling to recover. Take tanks, for instance. The reason why the Dobropilia force that Ukraine just took out didn't have enough tanks is that Russia is running out. That's according to the National Security Journal, which said on September 8th that the Ukraine war had become a tale of two hourglasses. What we see now is a test of Ukraine's military resolve versus Russia's ability to sustain its assaults to the level needed to continue taking territory. Right now, Russia's hourglass seems to be depleting faster than Ukraine's, despite Putin believing that his country can outlast the Ukrainian military. Nowhere is this depletion of the hourglass clearer than when it comes to Russia's tanks. Having already lost over 11,000 of them, if Ukraine is to be believed, Russia has been forced to rely on obsolete Soviet-era tanks that it's pulled from its storage units in their thousands. Many of these tanks aren't fit for purpose and are unusable in Ukraine, so Russia has been cannibalizing hundreds, if not thousands, of these older tanks to get the ones we now see in Ukraine up and running. We say now see, but the reality is that Russia's tank presence inside Ukraine has been declining for quite a while. The National Security Journal explains why, noting that the Insider reported in February that Russia is running dangerously low on tanks it has in storage. According to the outlet's research, Russia likely only has around 2,000 tanks, about the same number of infantry fighting vehicles, and about 3,000 armored personnel carriers that it could still deploy in Ukraine. Bear in mind that it's been around half a year since that research was published. Some of those dwindling reserves have been deployed and destroyed since the Insider published its figures, meaning Russia is on the ropes when it comes to its armor. The knockout blow will be delivered in 2026. That's when Russia will officially run out of its reserves, the National Security Journal points out. The Insider adds that Russia isn't building tanks and other armored vehicles at anywhere near the rate needed to replenish losses on the front lines. Russia is only building between 300 and 400 of its BTR-82 APCs per year, for instance, and that number includes the modernization of older vehicles from Russia's stockpiles. On the tank front, Russia is building around 300 per year, most of which are T-90Ms that rarely make it to the battlefield because they're riddled with manufacturing errors and are far too vulnerable to Ukraine's drones. One of those errors is what the Telegraph dubs the disco head glitch. When a T-90 is struck in a certain way, the operators lose control of the tank's turret as it spins in such a frenzy that the turret and the tank that it's attached to becomes impossible to use. So Russia is building tanks at far too slow a rate to make up for its losses. And the tanks that Russia is building aren't much use once they enter Ukraine. Ukraine would have seen the impact of its devastating strikes against Russia's hordes of tanks and armored vehicles firsthand thanks to the hacked security cameras. It would have seen that the forces being amassed close to Dobropilia weren't anywhere near as strong as they needed to be defensively, which created an opportunity for the ambush that was to come. But we'll get back to that in a moment. The other thing that Ukraine's forces saw was that the Dobropilia contingent was severely lacking in artillery. Again, that shouldn't come as a surprise given the Ukrainian Ministry of Finance's numbers we shared earlier. However, Russia's artillery woes have forced it into making some bizarre choices, some of which are seeing it field literal antiques in Ukraine. That's according to UK military expert Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, who published a piece via The Telegraph on September 1st that showcases the depths of the desperation to which Russia is plumbing when it comes to artillery. De Bretton-Gordon reported that Ukraine is claiming to have found the remnants of a destroyed D-74 artillery piece. That discovery is notable because this artillery unit was made during the 1950s and is so obsolete that the former Soviet Union had phased it out by the 1970s. So Russia is reviving artillery that it knew wasn't up to the task over 50 years ago and is now fielding it in Ukraine due to how severe its artillery losses are. De Bretton-Gordon adds that it may not just be artillery units themselves that are running in short supply for Russia. Some suggest that the ancient D-74, which fires 122mm shells, is being used because Russia is running out of the more modern and powerful 152mm shells, but can get plentiful supplies of 122mm from North Korea, which also uses these ancient weapons, he says. That's another indictment of Russia's faltering manufacturing. Unable to build the artillery shells its more modern system needs, it's relying on ancient systems that it can support by placing itself deeper into the North Korean pocket to continue fielding artillery. Did Ukraine see D-74s or other old artillery units among the Russian forces amassing near Dobropilia? We don't know. But what it would have seen was a gathering of troops that didn't have the artillery they needed to take Dobropilia, but were about to launch the assault anyway. Russia was about to field cannon fodder. All Ukraine had to do once it made the discovery was to make a decision. Should that cannon fodder be dispatched now or when it arrives at the gates of Dobropilia? Ukraine chose the former option, which brings us to the preemptive strike it launched against Russia's forces. Ukraine continued to rely on its IT army, having them monitor the movements being made by the Russian convoy. Real-time visual data pulled from Russia's own cameras revealed everything that Ukraine needed to know, Euromaidan press reports. Convoy routes were established, as were the timings of when Russia used those routes. Ukraine followed those routes to discover the staging areas that Russia planned to use for the upcoming assault on Dobropilya. All of this was done without Ukraine having to rely on satellite images or risk any of its surveillance drones, the latter of which might have given the game away in terms of Ukraine having figured out what Russia's troops were planning to do. Everything came from security camera footage, and that meant Russia had no idea that Ukraine had its eyes on the Dobropilya force. With all of the intelligence gathered, Ukraine decided that it wasn't going to wait for Russia's next wave to reach the front, even if that wave lacked tanks and artillery. Instead, it struck hard, and those strikes tended to rely on the weapon that Ukraine has made famous during its battle against Russia: drones. Once spotted, loitering munitions like the Ram-2X are launched to intercept Russian vehicles in transit, hitting them before they can reach the front. Those are compact drones designed for convoy ambushes, capable of identifying moving vehicles, circling overhead, and then diving directly onto soft targets with devastating precision, Euromaidan press said. For Russia, these strikes translated to soldiers within occupied territory who had no idea that Ukraine was even in a position to attack them until those attacks started happening. Drones rained down, taking out soldiers and vehicles with the explosives packed into their bodies. Euromaidan press also makes mention of Ukraine using missiles. Perhaps these weapons allowed Ukraine to take out sheltered infrastructure at Russia's staging grounds. Russia's military bloggers and Telegram channels soon started revealing that Ukraine's strikes were working. Euromaidan press says that videos are surfacing on Russian social media of armored vehicles and trucks being hit, all far behind the front lines and on the convoy routes that Ukraine identified, thanks to hacking Russia's security camera footage. This is a major problem for Russia. The reinforcements it just pulled from several major locations, including Kursk and Kherson, are being destroyed before they even have a chance to launch the assaults Putin gathered them to launch in the first place. The deep rear that Russia assumed to be safe is now vulnerable, and if Ukraine has managed to hack Russia's security cameras once, it's likely going to be able to do it again in other locations. That will give Putin pause for thought. Ukraine just made it clear to Russia that the force it assembled in Dobropilya was rushed and not up to the task required of it. If that force were powerful, Ukraine's hacking of security cameras might have given it enough information to put a dent in the force, but troops, armor, and artillery would likely still be heading to Dobropilya, but they aren't. Ukraine just made sure of that. And the great irony here is that this is one of the rare occasions where Ukraine has picked up a trick or two from Russia, rather than Russia playing catch-up to Ukraine's innovators. As impressive as the hacking of Russia's security camera is, the hacking is a trick that Russia has tried to use several times in the past to hurt Ukraine. For instance, January 2024 saw Security Week report that Russia's hackers had managed to gain control of a pair of residential security cameras in Kyiv that it used to spy on the city's air defenses and critical infrastructure that might later become targets for Russia's missiles and long-range drones. One of those cameras had been placed on a balcony by an apartment resident who used it to monitor their surroundings. Russia took control of the camera and foolishly live-streamed what it was recording to YouTube, rather than keeping the footage it was capturing secret, Security Week says. As for the second camera, it was located in a car park and provided the Russian hackers with visual information that was later used in a January 2, 2024 missile strike against Kyiv. Fast forward to May 2025 and The Guardian reported that Russia was up to its security camera tricks again. This time, the country's hackers attempted to gain control of cameras installed on Ukraine's borders, with the goal seeming to be to gain information about how Western aid flows into Ukraine. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre revealed the hack in an advisory note, where it revealed that GRU Unit 26165 was responsible for the attempted hack. In addition to targeting logistics entities, Unit 26165 actors likely used access to private cameras at key locations, such as near border crossings, military installations, and rail stations, to track the movements of material into Ukraine, the advisory said. The actors also used legitimate municipal services such as traffic cams. All told, Russia managed to access footage from 10,000 cameras in this hack, about 80% of which were in Ukraine, and the other 10% being in Romania and the rest in Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia. Russia's security camera hacks were undoubtedly impressive, and they got results. Ukraine's September hacks did the same. Now the second wave of forces that Russia has sent to Dobropilya is in shambles, meaning yet more reinforcements will need to arrive. That's good news for Ukraine for two reasons. First, Ukraine knows that the coming reinforcements will likely be as weak as those it just took out. If it's able to maintain access to Russia's security camera feeds in occupied territory, more attacks will be coming. Second, even if Ukraine can't keep track of whoever Russia sends toward Dobropilya next, it will know that Putin is having to pull troops and armor away from other locations. Opportunities may open up. Ukraine's defense of Dobropilya could end up giving it a chance to make gains elsewhere. For Russia, this is the second time that it's attempted a push into Dobropilya, with this latest effort having stalled out before it ever got the chance to start. The first was more successful, albeit temporarily. As the New Voice of Ukraine reported on August 26th, Russia had spent much of the first half of August pushing its troops east and northeast of Dobropilya, taking territory as a result. Ukraine eventually counterattacked, retaking several of the villages Russia had captured, including the Dobropilya-adjacent Zapovidne and Novoshakhova, putting an end to Russia's hopes of taking Dobropilya in a future assault on Pokrovsk. Russia would have hoped that the latest reinforcements it sent toward Dobropilya in September would have recaptured this lost territory. Ukraine's use of security cameras, missiles and drones made sure that didn't happen. Dobropilya is far from being out of the woods. On September 5th, Espresso Global spoke to Defense Express CEO Serhiy Zygorets, who said what happens in Dobropilya may have a larger impact on Ukraine's defense of Pokrovsk than any other factor. In this direction, Ukrainian counterattacks from the east are tying down significant enemy forces. In fact, everything will depend on how effectively our counterattacks can overcome the enemy forces concentrated there. De facto, the Russian troops currently have more personnel, Zygorets said. Ukraine needs to keep defending Dobropilya. It's done so twice already, with the latest defense featuring an ingenious use of Ukraine's hackers. Now, Ukraine has to prepare itself for whatever Putin sends to Dobropilya next. It's doing just that by turning the regions around Pokrovsk into a death trap for Russia's soldiers. Find out how in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's latest victories against the Russian occupiers. And thank you, as always, for watching.